What up, my big hoss tea sipping dudes? Boys, we finally got it. MX vs. ATV legend Southwick, not to be confused with Sandwick. Max deformation. Now that we have terrain deformation settings, max riders, max deformation should be the sandiest track in the game. Home dog just, oh, bro. Holy shit. I don't know if I've ever seen a dude just fall down right out of the gate and not even run into anybody before, okay? That's like me in like my first or second race ever, dude. Holy shit. In real life, dude, you know what I'm saying, bro? Oh, man. So, I still remember that time I ran into the gate on a Loretta Lynn qualifier race, 40 motherfucking dudes on the gate. I ran into the gate. You know, neither here nor there. Spency boy not paying attention. Okie dokie. Okay. So, by the way, boys, be sure and go follow me up on Twitter, Spencer Turley, no spaces and no capital letters. I'm going to try to start using Twitter a little bit more. I haven't ever really used that before. I think I have like 80-something followers on there. It's pretty dog shit, dog water. So if you go give me a follow on Twitter, I'd appreciate you. Just like my YouTube channel name, no spaces, no capital letters. Okay? So, I thought it would be interesting to come in here and do a rut tester video. Now that we've got this terrain deformation update, we've got... This is the other big thing to this last update. If you went through the patch notes, you would notice that they have actually went in there and made where the sand feels a lot different now than it did before. Like the different dirt compounds feel different now. I think they specified like the sand and the mud on the tracks feel different, more different than the normal dirt did before. Okay, so they're kind of going in there and playing around, making the different dirt compounds have different levels of, like, you know, friction and resistance and the way the bike handles on all the different dirt compounds. So I wanted to go in there and kind of take a look at that as well, because obviously this is probably the most sandy track in the game, or at least it should be. Okay, and I definitely noticed that. This is quite a bit different feeling than I remember this Southwick track feeling like beforehand. They got it feeling super deep. Okay, so that's lap 1 right there. We'll take a look at this max deformation. So you can obviously have the deformation on like 4 or 5 different settings in there. You can turn it completely off. You could have it on like low, medium, high, and max or strong. I don't know the exact wordage they use for it, but there's like, I don't know, like 4 or 5 different deformation settings in there. You can definitely see it doing something already, bro. Already. Ask YG if he hit it already. Okay, so, yeah, interesting that this track definitely has a super deep sand feeling to it now, like super robbing the power. If you're on a 450, it's going to feel like you're on a 125 on any other track in the game, you know what I'm saying? Definitely got that kind of feeling to it. And I'm sure they're probably going to update this again in the future at some point, because this does feel a little bit on the... kind of the boring side in a sense when you get the friction this high, and it's kind of hard to turn the bike as well. I would think it would be almost like, yeah, you want there to kind of be that sand resistance, but there also has to be enough fun gameplay. Let me give you a prime example of this. If you go to Sandwick on MX vs. ATV Reflex, let me jump in the crowd real quick. If you go to Sandwick on Reflex, like the actual sand feeling obviously feels different than if you're on like Armadillo Flats or Razorback or something like that, right? It's like a totally different kind of terrain deformation, totally different feeling to the dirt, but you can still pick up a crazy amount of speed on Sandwick on Reflex. You can still go super fast. And that's where the difference is here that I'm noticing between this Southwick track on MX vs. ATV Legends after these different updates and like a Sandwick on Reflex, right? It's like with them trying to go in there and make the sand feel more like sand, it's as if they've got it to a point now where it's just you're robbing so much power out of the bike that it almost eliminates the fun factor to the gameplay and the speed feeling to the gameplay on the track. And I think part of that problem is the scaling. You know, they've kind of made all of these Lucas Oil Pro motocross tracks like super small, narrow, one-to-one type scaling. And when you get on a track like this that's got small scaling like that, and then on top of that, you make the sand super high friction where it's just robbing the shit out of the power on the bike, well, it gets to the point where there's not much to the gameplay then at that point, right? We'll see what the terrain deformation does here, but so far, it's just, you're just going to hold the gas down, and it's like, you could do this shit with your eyes closed. You know what I'm saying? There's not a whole lot of, I'm not feeling a whole lot of, like, separate yourself from a beginner player. I'm not feeling a whole lot of that true skill gap to the track anymore, right? And anytime you have that combination of small scaling, not a whole lot of jumps, not a whole lot of like bike reacting over the roughness, and then on top of that, you got the super deep sand. I don't know, just kind of feels weird to me. Kind of something about it feels off to me. Like it's just not fully capturing the potential skill gap that a track like this could have in the game. And if you know, like I'm saying, a perfect comparison, a perfect example of this is like going to Reflex and going from one of those normal motocross tracks to like Southwick, right? It feels different, feels more like sand. The deformation ruts up different, but it also still keeps that speed feeling and that skill gap feeling and that trying to get the bike in a rut without flipping over on the roughness. This right here is just so power robbing. It's so, you can see, I'm wide ass open on this throttle right now, boys. It's not like I'm over here fucking feathering the throttle. Like, I'm not doing any of that. You could have my fucking finger taped all the way down to the throttle right now. That's how much 100% on the throttle I am right now, okay? So I don't want you to get confused here and think, see, even when MX vs. ATV Legends first came out, I know it could confuse a lot of people into thinking that, like, you were letting off the gas or you were, you know, doing something where the bike was slowing down, but in fact, that was actually a gearbox bug that the game had when it very first came out, where the bike was just not shifting properly, it wasn't going through the gears properly, and so it gave it this weird-ass effect where you were on the gas wide open, but the bike would, like, slow down, it would have all these weird momentum loss feelings in the game, and that's kind of the vibe that this track is giving me right here. Like, even when I'm on the gas wide ass open, it's kind of acting like I'm slowing down, or I'm getting on the brakes, or I'm doing some weird shit when I'm really not, right? So I think they need to do a lot more tweaking on this sand feeling to the game. Kind of seems like they may have just went in there and fucked around with that a little bit, you know, messed with it just a little bit to update the game just a little bit, but they're going to have to do a lot more than this right here, because this is maximum acceleration on the bike, holding the gas down wide open. I mean, there's a couple of spots you can kind of pick up the momentum just a little bit, but it's not that much. Like, it's just like you're barely moving. I mean, you're barely moving. There ain't nothing worse than getting into a dirt bike game where you're wide ass open and the bike's barely moving. I know even MX bikes to a certain extent has had that feeling to me. Like when I'm wide open on a 450 and down a straightaway, the bike just doesn't really pick up the amount of, it doesn't get that speed feeling and that true momentum feeling like when you're, you know, actually wide open on a 450 in real life. You're gonna fucking take off like a rocket ship, bro. Hell, talking about having like a actually modified or like a full-blown, you know, full-blown factory level bike and you're wide open on a 450. I'm just talking about even on a stock 450. If you're wide open on that throttle shifting gears, it's going to give you a whole nother level of speed feeling than like what MX Bikes gives you, what this gives you right here. And that's part of the problem when you make the scaling too small and then you make too much friction to the dirt. you're just going to be wide open everywhere and barely moving, and then you kill all the skill gap. You kill all the fun factor. So, I don't know. I think that's something they will fix upon on MX bikes in the future, but you can definitely see this shit rutting up like crazy. But is it really going to affect the bike like it does on Reflex when the terrain deformation starts hitting? Not really. You know, I can already tell you it's not going to do like that. There's just no way. There's just no way, bro. So, some of this kind of is getting a little bit of that deformation that you would have had back in, like, All Out a little bit, where it starts to almost get that ATV type deformation going on there, but nonetheless, I mean, it's just boring, for a lack of better, like, words for it or better terminology for it. It's just boring. And again, the first argument anybody that's trying to defend this is going to make it, well, it's sand, Spencer. What do you expect? It's Southwick, Spencer. They're trying to make the dirt more like sand. They're trying to make more friction to it. That's how Southwick is, bro, right? And that's why I brought up the whole example of Sandwick on Reflex, because Sandwick is the same way. It's got that sandy feeling to it, and the deformation ruts up like a sand track, but it's nowhere near as boring as this. It's got way more skill gap than this. It's got way more replayability and fun factor than this. So don't sit here and act like, well, it's just because they're making it sandy because it's Southwick, bro. No. Reflex is the perfect example of why that argument does not exist at all. Okay, so either way, as you can see, the deformation is certainly, doing something on the track, but how much it really affects the bike? Obviously, it's way more than any of those milestone games. Like, there's really not much of a question about that, but I don't know. There's just something about it. Like, this game just still doesn't have that. Reflex has such a flow to it, man. It has such a inertia, the bike front end, ass end to front end, inertia, movement, the way you can just glide around the corners. I feel like this right here, they've just killed the speed of the game too much. They've killed the power of the bike to such a degree that, whoa, you little motherfucker. Oh, dude. Wow, let me just take Spency Boy off of the track. Holy shit, bro. But yeah, just too much power robbing, too much speed robbing. I don't know any other words for it right here, but that is certainly the case on this track. So hopefully MX vs. ATV can, fix upon that in future updates. But if I was somebody testing this game, literally, it would take me about 5 seconds to get on a track like this, and I could already tell you it doesn't have anywhere near the skill gap, fun factor, speed feeling, too much friction to the dirt, the scaling of the track is too small. You see what I'm saying? All these things, if you played enough arcade dirt bike games, you can just almost instantly feel when a track just doesn't have the proper amount of skill gap and replayability. It's too boring. That's what we got going on right here on Southwick on MX vs. ATV Legends right now. So, you boys know Spency Boy always keeping it real out here. But, yeah, I almost think the deformation would probably do quite a bit more. I know that sounds crazy, but, like, I feel like it's just going to affect you a lot more on some of the other tracks in the game than it would on this Southwick replica right here. So, yeah. But, yeah, the sand does feel different than a lot of the other tracks in the game. I can at least give it that. But it's just, for the kind of track and the scaling of the track and how small everything is, you got to be careful adding that much friction to it, or you're just going to kill every aspect of the fun factor of the track. And I feel like that's exactly what they've done here. Like, there's just nothing to it. I'm just on the gas wide open and somewhat kind of keeping the bike on the layout of the track, and that's about it. It ain't going to flip over in any of this roughness. It's not going to get going fast enough for the bike to really react over any of this shit. There's just nothing to it. There's nothing to the gameplay of this right here. Like, a couple of spots you can kind of start to hold the gas down through a corner, but It's also got this thing where it's like, it's kind of hard to steer the bike. Of course, they're trying to replicate sand, but you got to do it the right way. You know what I'm saying? And that's what I'm saying. Like, I think it was just a stupid decision to make all of these Lucas Oil Pro motocross tracks super small scaling, because MX vs ATV Legends is just not that kind of game. It's more of a kind of a big jump trials-y, you know. I don't know any other way to explain that, but I definitely wouldn't call the physics of this game like super realistic. So when you go in there and you try to make these replica tracks super one-to-one scaling realistic, then it's not really going to fit the gameplay of the game. And I think that's the problem that's happening here to MX vs ATV Legends, specifically on these Lucas Oil Pro motocross tracks. And then even more so on the sand tracks where they've got more friction, it just becomes like a very dull, basic plateau of fun factor. And that's pretty much what we got going on here. You know what I mean? So, unfortunately, that seems to be the case. It's just like a lot more friction and harder to steer the bike. That's pretty much all they've done here with this. So, yeah. Maybe if the scaling was bigger, it wouldn't feel as bad. Maybe if the bike actually, you know, reacted more over roughness and you could actually flip the bike over from hitting roughness too hard. Like, there's no like risk versus reward going on here. You know what I'm saying? In good dirt bike gameplay, you always have that risk versus reward system where it's like, okay, if I just hold the gas down, you know, if I just hold the gas wide open through all this roughness through this corner, you know, I'm running that risk of the bike flipping over or crashing or flipping off the track. So then you gotta have throttle control. You gotta have leaning control over the roughness. It creates all those different gameplay elements, but that's not really what's going on right here. This is just wide open and the bike's barely moving and you're never gonna flip over anywhere. You see what I'm saying? You see the difference there? And if you get on even remotely like a hill or an uphill or anything like that, you can be wide ass open on that throttle and the bike's barely gonna move. That's another problem that MX bikes had for the longest time. They may have fixed that in this newest beta. I'm not really sure, but MX bikes was another one where you could be wide open, and if you got on anywhere where you would have like a corner and then an uphill, then the bike would just lose every bit of momentum, every bit of power, and it would almost come to a complete stop even though you were still wide open on the throttle. That's the same kind of deal that's going on right here. You can only have so much momentum loss and power robbing before you get to the point where you just kill the gameplay of the game. You see what I'm saying? So I think that's a bit of the problem we got going on here, but you can see the ruts. I mean, it's rutting up like crazy, but is it really making like actual bigger like ruts that you can dig into like it would on Reflex Southwick? It's not really doing to that kind of level. It's just not really doing that kind of thing. And this is max deformation, by the way. So this is the maximum with the maximum amount of riders. It's the maximum kind of deformation that you're going to get. And yeah, I mean, it's affecting it a little bit, but like, I don't think it's really doing it to a level that's going to like actually super affect the gameplay, because you're not really having to hit any bigger jumps. You know, that's typically where your deformation will affect the gameplay, is if you're like on a supercross track where you've really got to get the perfect momentum out of the corner to hit like a triple M or to hit a certain quad rhythm, and then you start getting deformation on it, and then the bike starts shooting off to the side or whatever. That's where the deformation can really affect the gameplay. Or like on Southwick on Reflex in those corners, when that deformation gets going, it really starts to affect the way you're hitting the corners, because you're going so much faster, you're carrying so much more momentum on Reflex, so it really then creates, like I'm talking about, that risk versus reward system where it's like, oh shit, if I just stay on the gas wide ass open through this corner, through this deformed rut, I don't know if I can make it out of this shit. right? So then you're constantly playing that game of how fast can I really go through this corner? How big is this deformed rut really going to affect me? I just don't think it's doing that on MX vs. ATV Legends currently. At least on this small scaling, small jump, small roughness, Southwick track right here, it's just not really doing it. It's just not really doing what you would expect on a full Deformation Southwick replica track in an arcade dirt bike game. It's just not even close to like a Reflex on Sandwick. Not even close to that kind of feeling. So there's still a lot of work that MX vs. ATV can do to fix on this shit, but I just have to go in here and point out this certain stuff. Again, I've been 99 to 100% throttle in this entire gameplay. So anytime you think you're seeing that bike slow down or why the hell is Spence letting off the gas, I ain't letting off the gas, bruh. I'm on that motherfucking gas, bruh. It's the too high of friction, the weird smaller scaling. It's all these other little elements that is causing the bike to feel like it's barely moving. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of making some ruts going up that right there. But most of the other parts of the track, it's just making that ATV, MX vs. ATV, all out, kind of just that like super flat deformation. It's not really making a bunch of individual ruts. That was the good thing about Sandwick, Southwick. Bro, we just go back and forth when we're talking about Reflex. But the track on Reflex, right? Sandwick on Reflex, it does make more individual, bigger ruts that you really gotta, you gotta be like thinking about what you're doing to get that bike in the rut and then trying to get the bike to ride all the way through that sand rut without cross-rutting or popping off the bike. It's a challenge. It is a true challenge on Reflex, but it's not a challenge on MX vs. ATV Legends. It ain't shit to go through these ruts. Like, it is literally not shit. Even if I want to cut up here to the insides, like, it's just nothing. Like, the bike is not going to pop off. You're not going to drag your knee on the ground and pop off. You're not going to... Even that right there, look at that. Like, even when I'm wide-ass open, walling out all the way to the outside, you still don't pop off the bike. You still don't crash anywhere. You see what I'm saying? There's just not enough of a crash mechanic in the corners. There's not enough of a speed feeling. A lot of things they can work on with Legends to get it a lot more like Reflex is, but Reflex is the fucking blueprint, boys. I've been telling you from day one, it is the blueprint. So, like, I mean, you can see these ruts, they're trying to get bigger where some of the pre-made berms were, but it's not really making ruts like just where it was flat before, like how on Reflex Sandwick. Even in some of those flat corners, it'll make a giant rut that you can actually dig into wide open on the 450, and it's like a totally different experience. But this right here, yeah, it's kind of digging in and building up where there was already a pre-made berm. It's doing it in those areas, but it's not really doing it in any of the other areas. You see what I'm saying? It's not really making a whole lot of ruts that you're actually going to dig into on the flatter areas that didn't really have pre-made before. So, yeah, either way, that's about the moral of the story here. We'll try out some deformation on some of these other tracks, kind of see if we can get some better results than this right here, but it just ain't really doing it, man. I mean, it's doing it in the sense of it's making a shitload of like visual ruts, and it's even making, physical ruts on the track too. But the whole thing is with the gameplay and the speed feeling and everything else to the gameplay, it's just not really affecting the gameplay that much. Like, you see what I'm saying? It's not really like, oh shit, now the track is totally deformed, so it's totally changing how I'm riding on the track, or I'm gonna have to slow down because that rut's giant. It's not really doing any of that. Like, yeah, you can feel the deformation, which is better than, 99% of those milestone games. At least you can feel it. But as far as, see, there's kind of 3 different levels to deformation. There's the visual deformation, which you can't really feel at all. And then there's like this right here, which is it's visual and you can feel it, but it's not really affecting the gameplay that much. And then you get to level 3, which is where you can see it, feel it, and it's affecting the gameplay, you know, the actual gameplay and how you're going to hit the corners and how you're going to hit the jumps like it does on Reflex. So you can see how we're kind of in the middle here from like a Milestone Games deformation and like MX vs. ATV Reflex's deformation. We're somewhere in the middle here. You know what I'm saying? So either way, that's about what we got going on here. Smitzy Boy just, you know, popping up on a little bit of pre-made roughness. It seems like anytime, like, it's like the bike will either do that right there where it'll just bounce up off the ground. It's just bizarre. It just still, see that right there? The bike will just start bouncing instead of actually, you know, taking the roughness or reacting over the roughness where you'll like almost flip over and you can save it, or it will flip over the front. It just starts bouncing. Like if you hit something too hard, it'll just bounce. So does seem like they're running into a bit of that issue that they had in MX vs. ATV All Out, where it was like a pogo stick bounce effect. So hopefully they can fix on some of this shit. But either way, that's the Rut Tester signing out. This is about as good as you're going to get as far as seeing what the track's going to do. So either way, man, appreciate you guys watching all the videos. I'll see you boys on that next one. Later, dudes.